Imagine you're in the middle of a high-stakes chess match. For years, the United States has been playing a defensive game, blocking every move China makes in the world of high-tech chips. But then, on December 8, 2025, the world woke up to a social media post that felt like the United States was suddenly handing over its queen. President Donald Trump announced that the ban on Nvidia's most powerful AI chip, the H200, was being lifted. To give you an idea of what that means, the H200 isn't just a regular computer part. It is the brain required to build the world's most advanced artificial intelligence. It's the engine behind everything from self-driving cars to military-grade simulations. For the last several years, the chip war has been the most intense technological battle in history. The United States had built a massive wall around China's semiconductor industry, and Nvidia, the world's most valuable chip company, was caught right in the middle, losing billions of dollars in the process. This sudden compromise from the White House felt like a white flag. People started asking, did the United States just give up? But as the dust settled, it became clear that this wasn't a simple act of peace. When you look at the fine print, this gift starts to look less like a helping hand and more like a Trojan horse. Before we look at the trap, we have to understand just how tightly the United States had squeezed China's neck before this moment. To understand why the H200 news is such a shock, you have to realize that for the last few years, the United States hasn't just been restricting China, it's been conducting a full-scale technological siege. Think of a country's semiconductor industry like a high-end restaurant. To run it, you need three things: the secret recipes, chip designs, the specialized ovens, manufacturing equipment, and the world-class chefs, the engineers. Starting in 2018, the United States began taking all three away. First, they targeted the ovens. They banned the export of EUV lithography machines. These are the most complex machines on Earth, and without them, it is physically impossible to mass-produce the tiny 7-nanometer chips found in modern smartphones. But the United States didn't act alone. They formed a chip alliance with the Netherlands and Japan, essentially telling China, "We don't care if you have the money. No one is allowed to sell you the tools." Then, they went after the chefs. In a move that sent shockwaves through the industry, the United States prohibited American citizens and green card holders from working in Chinese chip factories. Overnight, hundreds of top-tier engineers at Chinese giants like SMIC and YMTC were forced to choose their careers or their citizenship. Most of them packed their bags and left. It was described by analysts as an industry-wide decapitation. By October 2022, the United States drew a red line in the sand. They set a performance threshold. If a chip was faster than a certain speed, it was officially a national security threat and could not be sold to China. This effectively wiped out Nvidia's Chinese business. Their market share for high-end AI chips went from 95% to absolute zero almost overnight. This wasn't just a trade war, it was a total blockade designed to freeze China's tech level in time. And that is exactly why the sudden decision to let the H200 back in feels so suspicious. When President Trump announced the return of the H200 to China, it sounded like a win for Nvidia. But as the details emerged, it became clear that this wasn't a standard business deal. It was a high-stakes pay-to-play scheme with two very bitter pills to swallow. The first pill is total surveillance. The United States isn't just letting these chips go, they are attaching a permanent leash to them. Every single sale must be approved on a case-by-case basis by the United States government. But it goes deeper. The United States has reserved the right to perform end-user audits. This means American inspectors could theoretically walk into a Chinese data center to check exactly what those chips are doing. If they suspect the chips are being used for anything other than approved commercial use, like a secret military project, they can remotely kill the supply or block future updates instantly. For a Chinese company, that's like building a skyscraper on land that the landlord can take back without notice. The second pill is the Trump tax. In a move that feels like it was ripped straight from a boardroom negotiation, the United States government is demanding a 25% cut of every H200 sold to China. Think about the math here. A single H200 system can cost $30,000 to $40,000. Adding a 25% royalty or fee means the United States Treasury is pocketing nearly $10,000 per chip. This is an unprecedented move in global trade. It essentially turns Nvidia into a tax collector for the American government. Trump's logic is simple. If China wants the world's best AI, they have to literally pay to make America great again by funding the United States budget. By adding these conditions, the United States has turned a high-tech product into a political liability. It's a deal where Nvidia gets the revenue, the United States gets the data and the cash, and China gets a very expensive headache. You'd think that after years of lobbying, Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang would be throwing a party. But when reporters caught up with him after his December 2025 meeting with President Trump, his reaction was surprisingly cold. When asked if China would actually buy the H200 chips now that they were allowed, his response was blunt. "We don't know. We have no clue." This isn't just corporate modesty, it's the sound of a CEO who knows he might be walking into a trap of his own. To understand why, you have to look at the financial scar tissue Nvidia is carrying. In just one quarter of 2025, Nvidia had to write off $4.5 billion in unsold inventory because the United States government suddenly banned the H20 chip, a chip Nvidia had specifically designed to be slow enough to follow the rules. Imagine spending millions to build a legal product, only for the rules to change overnight. Nvidia estimated it lost $8 billion in a single quarter because of these policy swings. Jensen Huang's hesitation comes from two places. The moving goalposts. He knows that even if he starts shipping H200s today, the United States government could change its mind by February. No CEO wants to put thousands of chips on a boat only for them to become illegal while they're still in the middle of the ocean. And then, the pride factor. Huang famously said, "We can't degrade chips that we sell to China. They won't accept that." He realized that by the time the United States allowed the H200, which is now a generation behind his latest Blackwell chips, the Chinese market had already started looking for alternatives that didn't come with American political baggage. Nvidia is in a position where they are being told they can re-enter a house that they've already been kicked out of 3 times. Huang isn't celebrating because he suspects the locks have been changed while he was gone. If you were the CEO of a major Chinese tech firm like, say, Alibaba or Tencent, the H200 offer would look less like an opportunity and more like a toxic asset. On paper, you're getting the world's best hardware. But in reality, you're buying a spy in your own data center. The first major hurdle is security and sovereignty. Remember those compliance audits we mentioned earlier? For a Chinese company, allowing U.S. officials the right to inspect how and where chips are being used is a non-starter. It creates a massive backdoor vulnerability. In the world of high-stakes AI, your data is your most valuable secret. If your hardware provider is legally obligated to report your activities to a foreign government that has openly stated it wants to curb your growth, you aren't just buying a chip, you're buying a liability. Then there is the economic trap. Because of that 25% Trump tax, the H200 becomes the most expensive piece of silicon in history. But it's not just the upfront cost, it's the total cost of ownership. So, picture this. You spend $500 million building a massive AI server farm around the H200. 6 months later, tensions rise over a trade dispute, and the U.S. flips the switch. Suddenly, you can't get replacement parts, you can't get software updates, and your $500 million investment becomes a collection of very expensive paperweights. In business, certainty is often more valuable than performance. If a chip is 10% faster but 100% more likely to be cut off during a political argument, it's a bad investment. Chinese buyers are realizing that relying on American chips is like building a house on shifting sand. Why pay a premium for a compromised chip when you can invest that same money into a domestic partner who will never pull the plug? There is a famous concept in economics called import substitution. It sounds complicated, but it's actually very simple. If you stop selling a person a hammer, they will eventually learn how to forge their own. This is exactly what the U.S. sanctions have done to China. Instead of crushing their tech industry, the blockade acted like a giant slingshot, pulling China back only to fire it forward with more force. Let's look at the numbers, because they are, honestly, staggering. Back in 2018, when the first major restrictions hit, the localization rate of China's semiconductor equipment was only 12%. That meant for every 100 machines in a factory, 88 were imported. But by 2024, after 6 years of being backed into a corner, that number jumped to 40%. Before the sanctions, Chinese companies had no reason to take risks on domestic startups. Why buy a local beta version of a chip when you could just buy the gold standard from Nvidia? But once the US cut off the supply, buying American went from being a convenience to a risk. Suddenly, every Chinese tech giant had a massive, urgent motivation to pour money into local R&D. The best example of this is Huawei. While the US was trying to bury them, Huawei was busy outspending almost everyone on Earth. They've been investing roughly $71 million every single day into research and development. That's not just a budget, it's a war chest. By spending over 20% of their total revenue on R&D, Huawei has managed to support hundreds of smaller domestic suppliers, effectively building an entire silicon shield that doesn't rely on a single American part. The U.S. intended to create a technological desert in China. Instead, they've forced the creation of a local rainforest. By the time Trump offered the H200 back to China, the need for it had started to evaporate. This is the part of the story where the underdogs finally step into the light. For a long time, the tech world assumed that if you didn't have Nvidia, you didn't have AI. But by the time the U.S. government approved the H200 for export in late 2025, the reality on the ground in China had shifted dramatically. Enter the Huawei Ascend 910C. While the U.S. was debating whether or not to let Nvidia sell its chips, Huawei was busy perfecting a rival that could actually compete. On paper, Nvidia's H200 is still a powerhouse, but the Ascend 910C has narrowed the gap to a point that was previously unthinkable. In terms of raw computing power, FP16 performance, the 910C is reportedly hitting levels that rival Nvidia's previous generation H100. But here's where it gets interesting. Interconnect speed. In AI, you don't just use one chip, you use thousands of them linked together. This communication between chips is usually where Nvidia crushes everyone else. However, Huawei developed something called the Cloud Matrix 384, a massive system that links 384 of their chips into a single superbrain. Reports show that in certain specific tasks, this domestic Chinese system actually has higher memory bandwidth than Nvidia's standard configurations. And it's not just Huawei. Another company, Cambricon, is tripling its production targets, aiming to put 500,000 AI accelerators into the market by 2026. The new reality is that the H200 is no longer the only game in town. If a Chinese company buys the H200, they get a great chip, but they also get the Trump tax and the risk of a U.S. kill switch. If they buy the Huawei Ascend, they get a chip that is 80 to 90% as good, costs significantly less, and most importantly, it will never be turned off by a foreign government. By making the H200 so difficult and expensive to buy, the U.S. accidentally turned made in China from a patriotic choice into a logical business decision. The decision to lift the ban on the H200 chip will likely go down in history as one of the most ironic moments in the chip war. By the time the U.S. opened the door, China had already built its own house. The strategy was simple. Use the H200 as a tool for revenue and a window for surveillance. But in the world of high-tech geopolitics, timing is everything. If the U.S. had offered this deal in 2022, China might have jumped at it. In 2025, it feels like a desperate attempt to regain control over a market that has already learned to live without them. The backfire is now visible. Instead of slowing China down, the U.S. blockade acted like a pressure cooker, accelerating Chinese innovation by decades. We are now entering a dual-track world. On one side, you have the Western ecosystem led by Nvidia and the U.S. On the other, a completely independent, self-sufficient Chinese ecosystem led by Huawei and local manufacturers. The silicon curtain has been drawn, and it's unlikely to open again. For Nvidia, the H200 reversal is a bittersweet victory. They got the permission they wanted, but they lost the monopoly they once enjoyed. For the U.S. government, the 25% Trump tax might bring in some quick cash, but it has cost them their ultimate lever of power, the world's dependence on American technology. So, would you build your company's future on a chip that your rival holds the remote for? Or would you choose the domestic alternative, even if it's a little slower, just to know it's truly yours? The answer to that question is currently reshaping the global economy. If you found this breakdown of the H200 trap helpful, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The AI war is moving faster than ever, and we'll be here to decode every move. What do you think? Is the H200 a bridge to peace or a desperate play for cash? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.